Do you feel like your thoughts control you sometimes? Do you have the feeling that you're always just reacting to life? Do you wish you could have a more calm mind and understand why you make certain decisions and make them better? Well, if you're like me, you probably have heard about or have attempted to try meditation in the past. About 20 years ago, I wanted to understand why it felt like I was always reacting impulsively and making poor choices and poor decisions in my life. After an investigation, I came to the realization that it was because I just had so many thoughts swirling in my mind, and I was trying to execute on those thoughts, and I was overwhelmed, and I needed more space to figure out which decisions were really coming from my truth and which were merely just reactions to what life was throwing at me. If you've had experience meditating, it's possible that you felt like it was very difficult or that you just couldn't sit still for a little while and therefore you gave up on it. So my guest today is Cary Tamura. He is a meditation instructor, and Cary, CT, he happens to have led meditation sits in the middle of Times Square. Now, why is that important? Well, CT thinks that meditation is an ongoing built-up exercise. We need to build our muscles the same way we build our muscles when we train in the gym. And so CT and I had a conversation about this where we get into why it's important to stick to a regimen and to give meditation a chance. And we talk about the benefits of having a calm mind. Cary is an excellent speaker. He's also led meditation sits in a variety of settings, mostly to people who don't have a lot of experience. So I think this conversation is really valuable to people who are looking for an entryway into meditation. And so this just kind of fits with the theme of the Soul Pod. I'm your host, Gary Lewis. I'm somebody who's always exploring and trying to understand how I can make my life better, how I can be a more whole, actualized, invigorated, purpose-driven person. And so this conversation with Cary is just another extension of that. And the Soul Pod really seeks to provide you with the tools and the power to try to understand your mind, your body, your spirit, so that you can harness and cultivate yourself and your essence and your energy to be able to transform your life in a way that feels like you have control and that you're living in alignment and happiness with yourself. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I look forward to sharing it with you. CT, good to see you.
You.
So I'm going to start out this episode by talking about my friend CT here and how I first came to meet him. And then we're going to go into your bio. We'll discuss what you're up to. And then I'm thinking we'll have a conversation about sort of a continuation of a conversation you and I had recently about meditation and its popularity now, and also the benefit of it not having to do with such religiosity and sort of be more of a matriculated daily practice. So quick anecdote about how I met CT. My cousin Andrea had invited me to a birthday dinner party in Queens, Long Island City, Queens. And I of course went because her and I are very close, and I was looking forward to it. And I showed up, and I'd known most of her friends, but I didn't know any of her friends and I never thought any of her friends would have had an interest in Dharma or meditation at all. And so I had no expectations about showing up to this dinner party. Showed up there, and I was placed at the end of the table next to the only other guy there, and it happened to be CT. And it was then when Andrea told me, "Oh, by the way, CT is interested in meditation." And so we got to talking, and sure enough, not only was he interested in meditation, but he actually has been studied and trained with John Baker. John Baker is a student of Trungpa Rinpoche, and Trungpa Rinpoche was the teacher of my former teacher, Reggie Ray of Dharma Ocean. And so the fact that I met somebody who had any interest in Dharma whatsoever, let alone somebody who had a connection to Trungpa, just in the middle of a dinner party for my cousin that I just had no expectation that she would know anybody that knew Dharma. Kind of blew my mind. So CT, every time I see him, I feel bad for his partner Jackie, but I chew his ear off about meditation and all things Dharma, and we can go on for hours about it. So I'm just so thrilled to have him on the show, primarily because the whole purpose of the Soul Pod is really to allow the individual to have content that connects them up with their true essence. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be a denominational thing or it has to be a particular strategy or religion or spiritual practice. It really is just anything that allows the individual to inform their own truth, to inform their own connection to their truth. And in talking with CT, I know that he's shared with me that his perspective on meditation and mindfulness is kind of very much aligned with this idea. So I'm pretty excited to have you on the show. So thanks, CT, for joining.
Thank you for having me. It really was. It was a great dinner party for various reasons, but it was a great conversation we had, and it was interesting to see that connection. I mean, I guess sort of our lineage, both of our sort of lineages go back to Chogyam Trungpa, so it makes sense that we would, I think, connect on certain things. And it's funny too, because like last time we hung out, just to share it, but the last time we hung out afterwards, like Jackie, my wife was like, "Oh, so you guys got a good bromance going on right now." Meditation the whole time. It's like, it's rare that I get to nerd out about, meditation stuff like with people. So I enjoy it when I get the opportunity. So thanks for the opportunity again here.
Yeah, of course. And even funnier is that when I see you, it's usually in a family setting for me. So it's either my family and friends. And never do I ever get the chance to talk Dharma or meditation with anybody in my family or friends. So the fact that we're having that discussion juxtaposed to that environment, to me, is hilarious, but I also love it. So really grateful for it. And sorry, please apologize to Jackie for me when you get a chance, because I know I feel bad. I take you away and it's just, she doesn't get a chance to hang out with everybody there. So I'm going to do my best to avoid doing that going forward. We'll try to limit the discussion, and we'll
to do it like this.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do more on-air discussions. Yeah. So I'm thinking, I want to just talk a bit about your background, and then, I want to flesh out a couple of things that I found really interesting that I had no idea that you were up to. And so I'll go ahead and just talk about CT's background right now. He's currently a teaching mindfulness awareness meditation to professionals in New York at Corcoran City Habitats and Corcoran Sunshine. For those who don't know, those are all real estate development agencies or real estate agencies. CT is a real estate agent. He's a licensed real estate broker or agent. Is that?
Associate broker.
Associate broker. Okay.
Agent and broker is sort of the same thing.
Right. Okay. So he deals in real estate is what CT does. And which is why I find it so interesting that he has this amazing background and he's a meditation instructor. But, he's working every day, doing a job that, I'm sure you benefit from mindfulness, but really, I mean, it's a job that anybody would, that doesn't have a mindfulness background could be effective at. And so I'm curious to talk about that as well. We'll get into that after the bio. So he's also taught traditional settings, including New York Buddha Dharma at I almost screwed that up. Bodhi, that's right. 3 Jewels in the Village, the Align Center in Irvington, which, by the way, I checked out that website, and that's a great website. And there's a lot going on at the Align Center, and maybe we can talk about that too. In conjunction with the Western Buddhist Center, that's the Align Center, has an alliance with the Westchester Buddhist Center, and schools such as Marymount Manhattan College, Phillips Exeter Academy. He's also been featured in Mindful Magazine and is published on elephantjournal.com, which is a Buddhist-oriented website, as well as his site, thesittingproject.org. And it's important to call that out for anybody who wants to find CT, and we'll mention it at the end of the conversation as well. You can go to thesittingproject.org, and that's where you'll find anything you want to know about his background. You'll find out where CT is teaching and what he's up to, and ways that you can connect with him specifically around meditation. Also, I should mention at this point, CT has a personal website, carytamura.com. Both of these links will be in the show notes, so everybody will be able to access these links once we post the show notes, whether you're viewing this in video content or in audio content. And at carytamura.com, that's where CT, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where you discuss mostly your real estate dealings and what you're up to in real estate and the happenings and all the cool stuff that. Do you link to Instagram from there? Because you have a lot of videos on Instagram about real estate.
Yeah, so I have, CaryTamura.com is focused, it's my website for real estate, me as a real estate agent, but I do talk about mindfulness in real estate on that website. And I do link to, I have my moniker on Instagram is the real estate nerd _NYC. But you can get to there from CaryTamura.com.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. So I want to mention too. We were just talking about it that CT was recently featured in a South Korean TV documentary about Buddhism in the West, and the book Public Meditations, along with the likes of Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg. It's big news. And so a little bit about CT's earlier background. He started studying and practicing meditation in 2004 when he became a student of John Baker, one of the founders of Naropa University, the Westchester Buddhist Center, New York Buddha Dharma, and this is all John's background, and a student of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, which we just talked about. A proponent of meditation in public, CT regularly leads sits in Times Square. Imagine that. He's leading meditation sits in Times Square. CT currently works in real estate at the Corcoran Group. He ran his own music marketing and promotions company, and he spent some time as a consultant on Wall Street. What hasn't CT done? When not teaching or working, CT can be found hiking, snowboarding, making music, or spending time with his lovely wife and newborn daughter. And how old is she now, actually?
She is a year and a half.
All right. So actually, I don't think I got a chance in our lengthy discussion the other day to ask you about that. How has your meditation and practice informed you in your fatherhood? Like, what has it meant to you?
So my first reaction is that it's made it a lot harder for me to practice regularly because I lack sleep and I'm tired all the time, and I have like half the time I used to have because not only are we, well, especially during the quarantine, right? Not only was I trying to work each day, but also I'm trying to take care of a kid with, granted I have a lot of help with my wonderful wife, but like it's a lot of work taking care of a toddler and trying to work and trying to exercise and trying to cook good, healthy food and trying to meditate every day. It's made it a lot harder. But I think that the thing about the practice, I think, informs me and helps me with when I'm trying to parent and be with my daughter is a reminder to be present with my daughter. Because, one thing that's amazing about young kids is they're like super present about what there ever is in their focus. They're not necessarily like aware of everything that's going on, but if they're like looking at you, like when my kid like looks at me, it's like she's staring into the depths of my soul. It's like she is totally there with me, and she's so perceptive to whether or not I'm there or not. She really can tell. Like, and it's not like but if you're like when I'm present with her, I can see that that sort of nuanced awareness of like whether I'm there for her. So it's like it reminds me I try to be really present with her when I am present with her and when I'm interacting with her. And like, just for the parents out there, like, I've been meditating for 16 plus years and teaching for years. And it's like, it's hard, man. A lot of times I'm just like, okay, I'm on autopilot. Like I just woke up and I'm just like, here, let me change your diaper. I'm like doing it with my eyes closed. It's not like, it makes you superhuman necessarily, but it does help, Yeah,
I'd imagine that you don't expect to be every time she's sitting there piercing through your soul with her eyes, that you expect that you're going to be on in a way that is consistent, throughout the day, particularly with everything you have going on. I mean, but I'd imagine your practice is serving you, benefits you in some way that you're able to at least perceive that that's happening. And probably when that's happening, I'd imagine it kind of kicks you into gear a little bit, because we learn so much about secure attachment. We learn so much about how children are, how perceptive they actually are, and what effect that perception has later on. And so I'd imagine that somebody who's at least paying attention to kind of where they are in relationship to their child probably has a ton of benefit, immediately, and then also down the road. It's
it's interesting because I think that kids are so much more perceptive, that especially like a young kid who like under 2, who doesn't really speak a lot, doesn't have a lot of words, but she's way smarter and way more perceptive than her communicative abilities are. So I think it's easy for us as adults to kind of dismiss them in terms of what they understand and what they don't understand. But every once in a while, we catch her paying attention to, like, she's on the other side of the room, and my wife and I will be having a conversation, and she'll like say something in response to the conversation that we're having, and we're just like,
wow,
where how did you know that we were talking? And I think that's so, like, exactly to your point. And then the other thing too is that I think that the lesson that I'm taught by, or constantly taught by my daughter, and being present with her, is that when I'm not present with her, it's like I'm like half-assing, taking care of her or interacting with her because I'm stressed out or worried about something that I have to do in the future, whatever the work is I have to do, or wherever I have to go, if there's somewhere to go later in the day. And I end up doing both things poorly, right? And so it's like a disservice to both my kid and myself, by not being present with what I'm doing at that moment, whatever that is. And it's like, if you're gonna like focus, plan for the future, or work on something, then go do that. If you're gonna like play with your kid, then do that. But don't kind of try and split your attention, because you'll just do both ineffectively. And I think that's true of like life, and all the things we do, and especially in like professional way. I think that that's super important as well. A lot of times our anxieties about the future and worries about the past kind of get in the way of our taking care of whatever the task is at hand that we have, and then we do a poor job at it.
Would you say, is that what got you into Buddhism in the first place? This awareness that you wanted to have your attention in one place? Or walk us through kind of what connected you to Buddhism. And if you could actually provide a little bit of background about your upbringing, how you ended up in New York, and what drew you to Buddhism.
Sure. Okay. So the quick bio is I was actually born in Manhattan.
Okay.
My parents met in an elevator in the Condé Nast building in the early 70s.
Wow.
And not to date myself, but soon after I was born, and my earliest memories are from the city. And then we moved out to Connecticut, and I went to sort of school in Connecticut, then I went to boarding school in New Hampshire, and then I went to college upstate, and then I came back to the city after college. And I've been here most of the time, except for 3 years I spent in Boulder, which was a very cool place to be from a meditation perspective for a while. And what happened when I came to meditation was not because I was looking to be like perform better at my job or have more patience or anything like that. I actually was having some crazy series of years. I actually was a full-time musician from about 99 to 2000, almost 2004. And right around that time, towards the end of my time as a full-time musician, one of the things that happened was I realized that I was just a pain in the ass artist, and I didn't want to do work that was, for people like I could do commercial production where I would create tracks. People would be like, I need a track that's like this. And, if you can make it 30 seconds long or a minute and 30 seconds long, blah, blah, blah. And I realized I just wanted to make music for music's sake. I wanted to make art, essentially, music. And so towards the end of that period as a musician, I started having a bunch of issues. I had a really bad year where I was like, my band broke up. I broke up with my girlfriend, or my girlfriend. Yeah, I guess I broke up with her. But I was getting evicted from the place I was living on the Lower East Side, not because I had done anything wrong, but because the building was sold and I was on a month-to-month lease, and I was running out of money, and I had this falling out with some good friends, and it was just like a really, really tough time. And I remember sitting down one night, like in this apartment, and I was just like, I had to just take stock in my life. I was miserable. I really was having a tough time. And I just started looking at what my issues were, like what the problems were and why I was dealing with them. Like, why was I in the situation that I was in? I sort of asked myself this, and at a time when I wasn't super emotional about it, I could just sit and kind of really think about it and inquire. Like, I was genuinely curious, why am I having all these difficulties in life? And it became pretty clear to me at that moment that a lot of my difficulties were of my own making. They were of my own decision-making process. And the decisions that I had made, the choices that I had made in my life led me to that point. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, I need to reevaluate. I need to take stock in who I am and what I'm doing. And I need to kind of figure out, I need to look for ways to make better decisions for my life and for myself and for the people around me and for everything. And it was that kind of desire to look inward and see what it was that I was doing more clearly that led me to meditation. And more specifically, it was, I'll never forget it, it was a book called Buddhism Plain and Simple by a Zen guy named Steve Hagen. And I read this book. My friend recommended to me. He's like, listen, man. He knew I was having a tough time. He's like, listen, go to Barnes and Noble, go to the bookstore, go to the self-help section, and and then find 3 books that the titles of which appeal to you, and then just go buy them and read them, and see what happens. And I don't know if I did that exactly, but I did. I went into the bookstore, and I found this book, Buddhism Plain and Simple. I liked the title, whatever it was, and I picked it out of the air, basically. And then I went home and I read it, and from that moment on, my life was totally changed. And it was like from that moment, when I read the book, I was just like, this book explains everything that I feel is like correct about the universe and the way things work, correct about me as a person and us as people, and it's got a name, and the thing is called Buddhism, and the practice is meditation. And I had never had experience. I had very little exposure to anything Buddhist or meditation wise prior to that. And then from that moment on, I think I read only like Buddhist texts for about 7 years, and before I like had gotten my fill, and I was like, okay, I can like read some fiction now, So
I love hearing those stories of how people arrived at it. Typically when I talk to people about what drew them to Buddhism, it's some form of suffering. And the way that they actually get turned on to it is usually kind of like a funny anecdote like that. Like, you go into Barnes and Noble, you're in the self-help section, and then it led you on this journey. And so my experience with it is kind of similar in the sense that I was going through a lot of suffering one year. I mean, a lot of terrible things happened in succession. And it was around Christmas time, and I was in a relationship that I think we both knew it was going to go anywhere, but we had to buy each other a Christmas gift kind of thing. Or we felt like we had to. So we were in Costco together, of all places. And I saw a book with the Dalai Lama's face on it. He was just smiling. And I think it was The Art of Happiness. And I pointed at it like, man, I really want to learn what that guy has going on. And she remembered that. And so for Christmas, I got The Art of Happiness. And because I think I perused it it was Price Club at the time while in Costco. And when I looked at it, and finally when I read it, same deal for me. It kind of just set me off to the races. And around that time, at least in Long Island, where I was living at the time, there weren't really any sanghas. I mean, there weren't really almost no places I could go. I mean, New York City I could, but at that point, I hadn't been living in the city yet, so I was trying to find places where I could kind of connect. And there were maybe one or two in all of Long Island, one or two Buddhist centers. And I ended up finding them, going there, and sort of the rest is kind of history for me. And same deal where I was just reading Buddhist texts pretty much exclusively for a while. And I don't think I quite got, I mean, you really got into it. And I want to, good segue actually is to try to understand at what point did you realize you wanted to teach meditation, or that you knew you wanted to be somebody who's kind of, just taught meditation or taught mindfulness?
So, it's interesting. I think that I've always said that I think after you've meditated long enough and studied meditation and Buddhism, particularly long enough, I think that there are doors of perception that open, and I think that there are corners that you turn, metaphorically. And once those things happen, I think at a certain point, the only thing that makes sense is to actually try and teach or share. Because it's such a life-changing practice when it's done with dedication and a little bit of, intention and study, that like to not share this wholly positive experience. And I like to think of it almost as a tool set. It's like a life skill set, more than it is a religion. It's to me, it's these tools that are taught from generation to generation, and through books and through teachers, and these skills that you can learn and then apply to your own life. And to not at least try and put those, give those tools to the people out there that could benefit from them, that would be like a shame, So to me, it feels like a natural, almost inevitable conclusion to a lot of practice and study. And so, and I think that it was, but I can't take full credit on the teaching side. I started the Sitting Project as a website several years before I started teaching, and that was to share. I was getting a lot of questions from people about meditation. This is now, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. I forget exactly how many years ago I started the site, but and I was getting a lot of questions in real life. Like, just people were asking me, they're just like, hey, you meditate, right? CT's like, tell me about it. Like, I'm hearing about it. It was starting to really kind of permeate pop culture a little bit more. And so what happened was I wasn't really trying to teach, but I wanted to share my experience. So I started filming videos of me sitting, of just like literally one of the first videos I did. I was like, this would be great. I'll do like a 20-minute video of me sitting doing nothing, and it'll be like part performance art and part like people will be like, have you ever watched a video of somebody meditating? I'm like, maybe you haven't. Like, so I would just sit there like this, not moving for 20, 30 minutes. And I started posting them. On Facebook and so on and so forth. And then I created the site to both try and start answering some questions, and then also, post these videos. And what I realized too, around that time, and part of the reason I called it the Sitting Project as opposed to the Meditation Project, or whatever you want to say, is because I realized at that time, especially, meditation was still very viewed to me as like a new agey spiritual kind of thing. And it went along, like, to me, or to a lot of people, I think at the time, it went along with like crystals and incense. Like, you couldn't get away from like meditation, talking about meditation without people cracking jokes about, I don't know, like, some kind of thing that I don't really resonate with. And to me, it was this practice of mind, almost like I always like to say it's like going to the gym for your mind. And to me, that was a better way to communicate this to the people that I knew, like living in New York City as a professional, or not as a professional, but a lot of professional friends, and like people who were like hardworking, like, hard partying, like New Yorkers. Like, we love to go out and have drinks and dinner. We love to work hard, and like a lot of people that I know are very turned off by the idea of like, if you start talking to them immediately about their chakras, or if you talk to them about, that they need to carry around a certain type of stone or crystal in their pocket. Like, if you talk to me about that stuff, even now, I'm like, this is not for me. Like you and I are not on the same page on this stuff, and so I think that was where I started getting into it. Was I just saw this need to present information on meditation in a different way than it was commonly presented, and I really disliked the kind of, I don't know what other, I always use the term New Agey spiritualism, which I have a little bit of a negative connotation with, but like that, these kind of very ephemeral kind of ways of presenting meditation, to me, it can be presented in such a solid, definite way, that I felt the need to present it that way. And that's why I started with that. And then, I wanted my peers to be able to understand it better and not be turned off by the idea that, oh, you're trying to like bring me into a religion or a cult or something like that. I wanted to be able to say, no, this is a practice. This is like if you were like training to like play baseball, I'm going to teach you how to play baseball of the mind. Be a great baseball player, of the mind. And what tipped it from creating the website and then doing sits, public meditations, leading them, but not really teaching, was actually when I came back to New York after being in Boulder for a few years, about 5 years ago. I was actually going to a group called Dharma Junkies with Joe Mauricio, who is also a Shambhala guy and a fantastic teacher and a good friend. And Joe, after talking to him about stuff and going to the group, Joe asked me to start sort of leading meditations occasionally and filling in for him. And then I ended up taking over the group and doing it for, every week for some time. And that was really, so like, if I had to say anything, I would have to thank Joe Mauricio for like drawing me in. I think he saw that maybe I just needed a little push to kind of jump over the edge of fully diving into, teaching.
So was Joe at that time, would you say that you had, if you were to talk about like a root guru, they say in Buddhist speak, or your root teacher, the one teacher that resonates with you the most? I know you trained with John Baker, and who would you say was sort of the most influential on just in your path generally? And then obviously Joe kind of pushed you towards teaching, but was he also the person that you connected with the most?
I would say that John Baker is really, if I had a root guru, it would be John Baker. And not taking anything away from Joe, I think he's a fantastic teacher. I feel like John was, picking up from like where I read Buddhism Plain and Simple by Steve Hagen, who was a Zen guy based in Minneapolis or something like that. I started reading, I read both of his books. Then I started reading, I had a friend who was a yoga teacher, a fantastic yoga teacher, and Kira Lee Jelenchich. And she introduced me to actually Chogyam Trungpa, some of his books. I think Shambhala, Path of the Warrior, and maybe one or two other books of his. And I also started reading the Shambhala Sun, which was a magazine, meditation magazine, I'm sure you're familiar with, which is now called Lion's Roar, right? And I read that magazine cover to cover at like it comes out every 2 months. I read it, everything in it. Like I couldn't get enough of it for years. And I read a Pema Chodron book. And when I read Pema Chodron, I was like, she's amazing. Like she is my favorite Buddhist writer of all time, for sure. The Places That Scare You was so resonated with me. And When Things Fall Apart, these are amazing books to me. She was so wise, and she's able to communicate this stuff in such a simple way, such plain language. But the wisdom there, it's just like, it really cuts through like confusion, right? Like in the way. And so I realized, I was like, Shambhala publications, all this Pema Chodron stuff and the Shambhala Sun, they're all related. And then I looked it up, and I was like, there's a Shambhala Center in New York City. And it's like this mix of Tibetan and Zen Buddhism. And it was started by Chogyam Trungpa. I was like, oh, I got to go there. So I started going to their Tuesday night Dharma gatherings. And it was awesome. And I loved it. And so I was going religiously. And then I listened to John Baker, who was my favorite teacher at the time. I'd seen him talk. And then I took a class, and he was the teacher of the class. And then one night he's talking about the teacher and the student relationship, and he was encouraging people. He's like, you got to go find a teacher. If you're serious about this, find a teacher and go study with them, And I went up to him right after the talk and I was like, hey, John, I'm CT Tamura. You're my teacher. And he's like, I live in Westchester, and I only am down here once in a while. And I was like, that's fine. I'll drive to Westchester. I'll come to you. And for a while he was like, and he was kind of like, and then I was sort of relentless about it. And he took me on as a teacher, as a student, and then sort of, and the rest is sort of history. And we've become really good friends. I love John. I think he's an amazing person and an awesome teacher,
One of the things you and I talked about recently was, here's John Baker and Pema Chodron, Reggie Ray. These are all direct students of Trungpa Rinpoche, arguably one of the Tibetan Buddhist teachers who brought Buddhism to the West. I mean, many people credit him with kind of, bringing the awareness, at least creating a lot of awareness around Buddhism to the West. And, what always blows, and John Wellwood, the list goes on and on. There's a bunch of, teachers who've absorbed amazing content, who then went on to develop their own styles and their own ways of teaching and have so much to offer. And I just can't get over the fact that not enough, in my view, not enough awareness, not enough public awareness is built around the amazing body of work and the amazing knowledge base that these teachers have. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, I so agree with you. And it's like, when I listen to John Baker talk, and when I listen to Joe Mauricio talk, and when I listen to guys, like there's a guy named John Barbieri in Fort Collins, Colorado, that I don't know if many people have heard of him. These guys are amazing teachers. And that's the whole thing about like the Buddhist lineage, right? Is like, it is passed from generation to generation of teachers, and you have the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years that is all residing in the teachers of today, guys like John Baker, and like, you can pay $10 and sit in a class with him with 10 or 15 other people every Monday night at 64 Fulton Street. And it's like, like people should be, you should be willing to pay thousands of dollars and dedicate your life to this stuff, but that's where we are. And I think that part of that too is also motivating for me. And I think maybe for you too, right? Is that the reason that we kind of want to do this is because we want to get this out to people. We want to share this knowledge that has been handed down, that is transformative and wholly positive, and just, enjoy it.
It's always funny to me when people talk about the books that first turned them on to Buddhism. You just mentioned one of them, but I always hear people say it's Pema's When Things Fall Apart. And I think it's because typically people are brought to Buddhism just because they're experiencing suffering and they're looking for a new way of thinking about how they reference themselves, how they reference their awareness, why this keeps happening to them. And there's typically this sense of things have fallen apart, right? And so what an amazing title. Whatever publisher designed that one for Pema, good for them, because when I read it, of course, when I was going through a crisis and things were falling apart for me, just the way that she structured that book and the way that she discussed, she was a wife, and a mom, and she had real experiences. She wasn't a Buddhist. She didn't have any ideas that she'd go on to become living Gampo Abbey in Nova Scotia and be a student of Trungpa Rinpoche and have this devout following of people who absorb every word that she speaks in terms of her accumulated wisdom. She was just trying to find answers. I mean, she was living life and doing her best. And the fact that is true, I mean, the fact that it's a great reminder that you don't need to set out to try to be an enlightened being to benefit from mindful techniques and mindful practices. And I I'm grateful for the suffering that I've had that allowed me to kind of have the benefit and the desire to seek beyond the comfortable, automatic, programmed way that I was living. And one of the things that we discussed the other day, one of the terms that you used, which I really like, and it's on your website, is you talk about meditation, you talk about sitting in terms of being like a bicep curl for the mind, in terms of like, being a muscular curl. And so with that, I want to understand a little more about, I know now that you're teaching for certain corporations and you teach meditation to real estate professionals. In addition to, by the way, your really insightful videos on Instagram, social media, particularly Instagram, that help people walk through the process of buying a new home, or just anything about sort of real estate awareness and facts and sort of these little anecdotes that people might not be aware of, specifically in New York City, which is its own animal within real estate. So the fact that you tie it all together, and the other day when you told me that you offer mindful touring of properties, where did that come from, and what's the idea behind it? Because I think it's genius personally. I think the idea, I can't tell you how many times I have, mostly I've done rentals in New York City. So I've rented a place and I was like, this is going to be an amazing place. It's got X amenities. It's by the water. I could, the subway's there. It's got all these great things going on. And then I get into play and I got a great deal maybe. And then I get into the apartment and then all of a sudden there's this like weird smell coming around that just is intolerable. Or there's a little creak going on to the staircase that's so resonant that it like reverberate, little things that like I would never have even considered. And then when I get in my space, I sit there and I'm like, how the hell did I arrive at this place? I mean, what made me think this was a good apartment? So the idea of a mindful walkthrough to me is just like gold. And I'm hoping anybody listening to that shares the same view, because I think it's a great thing.
Thank you. I'll give you the perfect example. Subways, there are, I can't tell you how many apartments I've been in where you can hear and feel the subway rolling underneath the building, right? Shaking the building and rumbling. But a lot of times it's kind of subtle and it's low pitched. And so like when you're in the middle of when you're just walking through an apartment and maybe there's, noises outside, or maybe you're talking and the real estate agent is talking and showing you the place or whatever, it's so easy to miss something like that. And I've seen it happen in listings of my own where people, walk through and they're like, they don't necessarily catch that. And it's like, the thing is that I came to it actually when I was doing real estate out West in Colorado. And I was just kind of looking for ways to integrate like my practice a little bit more into my professional life. It's just naturally integrates, I think, into anyone's professional life, in the sense that the more present you are with a situation, particularly difficult situations or negotiations, the better I think you can, with Buddhist terminology, you'd say the more skillfully you can interact with that situation, right? So I find that very helpful in terms of reading people and reading between the lines of what they're saying and what they actually mean. Is perception, right? Increased, better perception of what's actually going on in that moment. But like that awareness of like what is going on in the space around you, which is really important when you're trying to choose a home or a place to work, whatever it is. Like that is the kind of thing that you need to be calm and you need to be focused and you need to be open and aware of your environment in order to catch some of those little things, smells. I remember I was walking into one place and there was like a cat pee smell in this place in Chelsea. It was like a walk up. And so we walk up to this, the top floor and look at this penthouse apartment, and my folks were thinking to buy. And they're like, oh yeah, like great place, blah, blah, blah. And then we walk down and walk out, and I'm just like, oh man, the smell is like not good. And we walk out and we're talking about the place afterwards. And they're like, yeah, and that smell. And they're like, what smell? What were you talking about? It's like, oh, you didn't smell the cat smell? And it's like, and there's no way that they would have missed it if you had pointed it out, but they were so like involved with whatever their thoughts were, or whatever they were worried about or thinking about, they just missed things like that. And so that's both the benefit of working with a real estate agent, but it's also would be the benefit of being a little more present, and worrying a little bit less about whatever the agenda is in your head that's sort of like grabbing your attention, as opposed to what's actually happening to you, at that moment, what's in front of you. So besides in the real estate setting, you're also doing these corporate meditation programs. I guess courses, are they just sits that you're running, or? In some cases, I'm doing regular meditations, guys. So I typically do, like, the typical thing is an hour-long session where I do the first 30 minutes. I will do meditation instruction and a short talk. So I'll teach people, how, like, meditation technique, and oftentimes I'll try and give a short talk and relate it to how it helps us be better workers and better human beings, and helps us interact with the world more skillfully again. And then for the second 30 minutes or so, I usually do a guided meditation where I typically will do a body scan and show people how to relax, and then focus on the breath and sort of typical meditation techniques. And one of the things that I do, and one of the things that's important to me to do, is I do it in using plain English. I don't like to use a lot of traditional Buddhist terminology. I talk about mindfulness, awareness meditation, not shamatha vipassana meditation. Occasionally I'll throw a little lingo in there if I feel the need to, like, show that I know what I'm talking about. But I really prefer to stay away from it, because I don't, to me, it's not, you can, if you're really nerdy about your meditation, you can make it a viable argument that, using the term vipassana for awareness meditation has connotations that don't exist in English language using the word awareness. I don't think that those are important to people who are learning to meditate. That's really like that's somebody who's already got a meditation practice, and I'm not as concerned with those people. Like, they can go and study, and like, I enjoy studying that stuff too. But when I'm teaching, I really like to teach people in plain colloquial English, and like, swear if I need to, like a good New Yorker, or like, whatever it is, to communicate this stuff. Because the thing that I think turns a lot of people off with learning meditation and getting into it in many cases is that it feels very foreign, because all the practices that have come to us here in the US and New York City and the West are all, originally Eastern practices. I shouldn't say all of them. There are sort of meditative practices, I think, in, different Western religions as well. But really the meditation we're talking about, and when we talk about mindfulness meditation or awareness meditation, we're talking about an Eastern practice that has been imported to the West. And what I don't want, and I think a lot of people don't like, and it feels almost icky in some ways, is the trappings, the religious trappings, the cultural trappings that accompanied the teachings when they came to the West. And it's not, some people are more open to it than others. But I think when you go to the sort of the average person in the US, or certainly the average person, in New York City, and you talk to them about meditation, again, like when you start talking about chakras, or you talk about the 6 paramitas, or you talk about, the noble truths, like it starts to feel like religious language to me. And I personally do not want another religion. I don't see it as a religion. It is a practice. It is a practice of mind. It is a way of being, and it is a skill set, tools that you can learn and to help you become more aware, a more fully realized person. But it doesn't require the cultural trappings to learn. And so for me, that's always been super important in terms of the way that I communicate stuff about meditation.
Yeah, I have an issue when very often I'll talk to people. Some are very advanced in their training, their Buddhist training, and I'll hear things like, I'll just hear opinions that to me ring of what I call, or what people refer to as Sangha exclusivity. So, we're doing it right, our lineage has it right, or our style of sitting is accurate, the postures whatever it is, is the best or is right. Anybody else doing it, the same you find in any other spiritual tradition. And it's funny because I think that it specifically with Buddhism, there's a sense that because it's intended, the Bodhisattva path, you're intended to be, operating or living in a way that is intended for the harm reduction of sentient beings and for the benefit of others, that it's not possible to co-opt it, and it's not really possible to make it sort of a narcissistic endeavor or to kind of have exclusivity about it. And in reality, of course it is. And I've seen it a lot. And actually it's driven me away from certain groups, certain teaching, certain areas where I feel like there's enough of a collective sense that it's kind of their way or the highway. I definitely tend to draw back and recoil from. And so in some ways, I almost feel like it's almost worse in Buddhist circles than in other areas, because people tend to be highly intellectual and there tends to be a sophistication component to it. And sort of, it could just be my own perception, but I definitely have been shocked and surprised, like on certain retreats that I've been on, where you hear someone say something and you're like, wait a second, that's not supposed to be happening here. But it's society like anywhere else. It's just another place where people go to do what they think is right, to practice in the way that they believe is right, and to live in the way that they live. It seems more offensive in that setting, I think. And on that note, what I'm curious about is, I've been to certain, when I've been to retreats, very often you'll have a retreat manager, retreat container, host, or a lot of different terms for it. But there'll be instructions given about, very specific instructions about, depending on the tradition that you're studying in, the tradition you're practicing in, about how to sit, about kind of what the practice is aimed at, and I find that specifically for beginners, it can really go one of two ways. It could lend itself to people who really need guidance, who feel like it's benefiting them to have a very direct and specific way of actually practicing. And then in others I've talked to, who I have friends that I've said, hey, you should check out this Sangha, given the fact that you kind of like the teachings that I talk about. And they'll go and say, wait a second, that was a little too much for me. That was a little too much specificity about how I should be operating as an autonomous person. And there's some sort of recoil from that. And so I'm curious, because you are giving these types of meditation teachings in a corporate setting. We talked about this the other day. When somebody is experiencing discomfort with, or they feel that they're just not getting it, and that therefore meditation likely isn't really going to be a benefit to them. What's your perspective on, or how do you handle a student that has that sort of an approach or that sort of a reaction?
So I think that you've brought up a lot of interesting and important points. I think that how I handle students who are saying, this just doesn't work for me. Like I can't sit there and quiet my mind, and I don't see any benefit to it. First thing, I try to make a parallel to a workout regimen, because the thing is like, if you go to let's say you have never worked out before, or you haven't worked out in years, and you're like, I'm going to go run a marathon, and you go, and with no training, you go and you run, 6 miles or 12 miles, or try, you're just going to hurt yourself. You're not going to see any benefit. It's going to be painful, uncomfortable. Like it doesn't work that way. You don't just decide you're going to become a mental athlete and get into better physical shape, and then go do it once or twice or 5 times, and then be like, oh, well, that didn't really work for me. It's the same thing with meditation and meditation practice. And that's why I use the gym analogy, like going to the gym for your mind or getting a workout, for your mind. Because it parallels like the timelines as well. Like if you meditate for 20 minutes a day, 6 or 7 days a week for a few weeks, you're going to see a difference. If you do that same practice for 6 months, you're going to see a real difference. And you do that for a year or two, and with a little bit of study, like your whole life is going to change for the better. It doesn't really matter where you are in your life. There's always the ability to become like a little more aware, a little more compassionate, a little more open, a little more, patient. And so like this, it's the same thing with working out, right? Like if you decide I'm going to go, become, a competitive, CrossFit dude, like if you go and you try and lift, like do deadlifts without the proper technique and without building up your back muscles, you're going to pull back muscle in your back, and you'll be out of commission for like 6 months. It's like you have to learn some of the technique, and you have to do it with consistency for you to start to see the changes that happen. And so like making those parallels, I find when I explain that to people that way, it makes sense to them. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like it's, and I think in some ways, you have to be dedicated enough to want to do it for a few weeks at least, or a few months, and carve out that time in your day. And it doesn't always have to be 20 minutes, 30 or 40 minutes. It can be 5 or 10 minutes a day, if that's all the time you have. But the consistency really matters, the same as it would matter if you were like training for a marathon, So I think that's the way to, that's what you say. That's what I say to people who are like, oh, this isn't really working for me. The other thing that's very common, what you mentioned, is they'll say, well, I just can't sit. It's not working. Like I can't quiet my mind. And the thing that I try to explain to people is that you're not trying to sit there and make yourself not think. You're sitting there and trying to observe your thoughts. You're trying to be aware of your thoughts. We're not asking you not to think. That's what our minds are designed to do. Our minds are designed to think. Like that's how they help us navigate the world. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. But what we are trying to learn to do is we're trying to notice how often, how easily distracted from the present we are. If we sit down and we say like, oh, our purpose here is to focus our attention on the present, to be aware of what's going on in the present, to focus on the breathing, be aware of what our senses are telling us. That is, if that's the job, that's the workout that we're trying to do, the more you notice that your mind is drawing you away from that, the better it is, the more opportunities you have to actually come back to the present. And that coming back, that noticing that you're distracted and coming back is the act of meditation. People, when they're beginners, right, they think that meditation is just like sitting and doing nothing. Meditation is actually very active. And I know you know this, but like, I feel like it's important to explain that to people when they don't really know it, because when you see that, oh, I need my thoughts, I need my mind to do its thing, and I need to notice what it's doing in order to practice meditation, to practice coming back to my awareness of what's going on right now, as opposed to getting lost in my thoughts about the future or the past. That is the act of meditation. And that is what I like to describe as like doing a mental curl and strengthening your mind's ability to be present. Right. And I find that is helpful when talking to people who are like, I can't do this. I can't sit and be quiet and quiet my mind. I say, you don't have to. Like that's what we're working with. We're here to work with our minds, and yeah.
When you're so in these settings where you're giving these teachings, probably I'd imagine mostly to beginner meditators, maybe not, maybe a lot of the other folks in these corporate settings have experience.
These days, a lot of people do have some experience, some exposure to meditation.
Are you approached by folks who are who are interested in taking their practice to another level, we'll say, or to kind of continue with it in a way that would incorporate perhaps Buddhist practices? And, do you find that people are interested in kind of continuing on, or is it typically, folks, I'd imagine it's folks that are very busy that are really interested in finding ways to work with their current conditions and to incorporate practice in a way that really enhances their current situation. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's the latter of those two more often. I think more often I am working with people who are busy in their lives, working their day jobs. They've carved out some time to sit down and try and learn how to, I think if they're beginning, they're trying to de-stress, they're trying to, relax a little bit. They're coming to the practice with the hopes of, kind of getting a bunch of things out of it. Not as many people who are coming to it with a great deal of experience and in their own tradition or whatever. Although I would say, maybe on average, I'd say, 10 to 15% of the people, maybe 20% of the people that I teach do have a regular practice, and do have experience. It's always harder to teach a wide variety of students, like total beginners and experienced practitioners at the same time. But I tend to, in those situations, focus a little bit more on the beginners, because if you're an experienced practitioner, you can sit there and meditate without me helping you, right? But I also think that, I've heard John Baker talk about this a lot, and that, when Chogyam Trungpa came to this country, he recognized that the message needed to be changed to communicate to Westerners, to people in the U.S., and he realized that it needed to be sort of taught differently. And one of the things he did is he started teaching this hybrid of shamatha vipassana, mindfulness awareness meditation, which is an advanced practice in the East in some cases, in his tradition, right, in the Tibetan Mahayana tradition, and he felt that we were ready for it, that it was good for Westerners, and I think that was very wise decision on his part. I think that especially now, I mean, I don't know what it was like in the 60s. I think in the 60s there was, in the 70s there was a lot more spiritual materialism going on, and people were really trying to find identity through spirituality, as opposed to the opposite of what meditation does, right? Which breaks down the ego. It sort of deconstructs the ego if it's done properly. But I think that is, you can sit down now in 2020, we can sit down and we can talk to people and explain to them the same stuff that we're talking about right now. And I think that people respond to that, pulling back at the curtain of what you're actually doing. I think that we don't have to lead people step by step necessarily from, like it has to be done this way, and you have to be in a certain posture, and you have to do this. I think that we can reach more people by adapting, the practice, the teachings to an audience today, a sophisticated audience that is not looking for a religion, but wants, a practice to help them with their lives. I don't know. I think that's something that Chogyam Trungpa was very prescient about, and ahead of his time, and also something that I, really like about the way the teachings have been taught to me.
So is that sort of the intent too behind how you arrived at realizing you wanted to lead these public sits, these public meditations? What drew you to decide, I want to have a meditation sit in the middle of Times Square, which, by the way, I have lived in New York City in various places. I've lived in Hell's Kitchen, which is adjacent to Times Square. And when I lived there, I made it a point to never walk through Times Square. My goal was to, and I worked on the East Side, and it would have been a straight shot to just go straight across 42nd Street. And I wanted nothing to do with Times Square. So I would go like blocks out of my way, put 20 minutes on my walk just to avoid it. And I to this day, I still try to avoid Times Square. And here you are hosting public meditation sits in Times Square.
Yeah, that that is spoken like a true New Yorker and what every good New Yorker agrees with you. All want to avoid Times Square at all costs. Only if you absolutely have to do you want to go to Times Square, because it's so crowded and busy and just a pain in the ass to get around, and that is exactly why I realized that we needed to do meditations in Times Square. It's because one of my favorite sayings that Pema Chodron says is she talks about leaning into the sharp points of life, right? And that's the whole idea that Chogyam Trungpa says meditation is not a vacation from annoyance. Okay, and so what a big mistake is for people when they start thinking about meditation or wanting or meditate is they think that they've got to meditate in a quiet space with no distractions and they've just got to find inner peace. And it's just not that. The whole thing is about meditation that you learn is that what you're actually learning to do is you're learning to become aware of everything that goes on, including your own discomfort with things, right? And that leaning into the sharp points of life is learning to work with discomfort, to work with things that make you uncomfortable, to work with things that hurt you or pain you, to look at them and make friends with them, right? You don't have to do anything with them. You don't have to, it's not about not feeling discomfort. It's not about not feeling suffering or pain or any of these or negative emotions. It's about instead of running away from them, from trying to get away from these things that make us uncomfortable, it's stopping and turning back to those things and looking them right in the eye and saying, why is this discomfort here? What is it that makes me uncomfortable? And so when I learned that was just an amazing thing. And I looked at the way people start with meditation. I was like, Times Square is possibly the most annoying and least pleasant place for me to be on any given day. Let me go there and sit down and work with all that stuff that comes up. Because it's not just the hustle and bustle and the noise and the smells and like the sights and the crowds. It's also the self-consciousness that comes up when you're sitting in meditating in public, right? People look at you, people talk about you. Maybe sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But like, even if they're not, you feel self-conscious sitting down in the midst of thousands of people and meditating. And that is such a fantastic place to practice. Internally, a fantastic place to practice. That discomfort, that I think they talk about the charnel grounds in our tradition, in Mahayana tradition. Like, it's just a great, annoying place to practice.
One of my favorite quotes by one of my favorite teachers is it's Ram Dass's quote, and I might have even quoted this in my last podcast episode, but it's the goal is to keep your heart open in hell. So keeping your heart open and like you said, not necessarily acting on it, not doing anything about it, but also not closing that heart, keeping that pericardium, keeping that heart open in these environments is the way that you are going to be able to work with yourself and your own conditions far more advanced and far more in a well-rounded way than you would if your practice involves simply retreating or going on retreats, for example, or living in or practicing in an isolated place and just finding the right perfect time to do it. That's probably going to help you on some level, but ultimately it's not going to you're not going to be prepared for the conditions in the way to meet the conditions that conflict within you the most, unless you can kind of begin to contend with these external conditions that can be so distracting, so annoying, pierce through us in that way. So I just think there's so much value in that. And I'm challenging myself now, even though I hate Times Square and I've been avoiding Times Square for many years. Next sit you heard it here, I'm going to join it. I promise that. And I'm going to probably be really annoyed for a while, but I'm going to make sure I sit there and do whatever I can do in that experience. Because I think it's just such a good idea.
when I was teaching with Joe Mauricio, one of the things we were talking about, titling our talks was Meditation for Real Life. And I love that title because one of the things is, when you go and do a meditation retreat for a week or a month or, whatever, solitary retreats, all these different kinds of retreats you can do, they are typically very quiet, very calm places, and you can really deepen your practice there. They're fantastic. You should all absolutely do them. But the question is, if you're like a monk in a cave and you go and you spend your life meditating in a cave and then you never interact with anybody, you never interact with the world, and you don't take this practice out into the world, then what good is that meditation really doing other than maybe helping you be calm? There's personal gain from it, but there's something about interacting with the world that is really important about our practice, because once you have started to see how things really work, then your interaction with the world is where the road meets the rubber, or the rubber meets the road, right? It's easy to be not annoyed when you are by yourself meditating in a room. It's way harder to not be annoyed when your mom is nagging you about something and you're a grown person, or when your kid is acting, is having a temper tantrum, or your partner or your spouse is in a bad mood, and so that whole meditation in public thing is meant to be along those lines. It's interaction with the real world as it happens in real time. It's not theoretical. It's sitting and working with yourself while you are in the midst of all this stuff. And the thing that I want to share that's really interesting about when you sit and you go and meditate in a place like Times Square, which I've now done a number of times, is I think for most people, when you sit down and you meditate, you have a meditation practice, it takes you a few minutes to settle into your meditation, right? You go from doing whatever you're doing to you're okay, I'm going to sit down. You sit down in a chair and your cushion, you put on your timer, or you check the time, and then you start meditating. And for me, I find that, if my meditation practice, it could take me 10 minutes to settle in, right? It's my mind does calm down after a few minutes. And then I become more aware of the space, right? This is the mindfulness of breath helps me become more aware because it relaxes me. And with Times Square, when you sit down and you try and meditate in Times Square, I find that the amount of time it takes me to relax in that environment doubles, right? So instead of 10 minutes to being relaxed in to settling into that meditation, it takes me 20 minutes, right? But what happens when I settle into that meditation, suddenly everything around me, it's the energy changes, right? It feels like the energy changes, but really what's happening is the energy is changing in me. And as I settle, I start becoming less annoyed and anxious about what's happening around me. And I stop judging the fact, I'd stop sitting there being I don't like this. I'm self-conscious. What's going on? Who's that? And I start just actually taking in what's happening. And what's happening, there are all these natural patterns. There are the natural ebbs and flows to traffic and crowds and noise and light. The sun changes as you sit there. The lights on the billboards that are lighting up Times Square, there are these just patterns, and just, the experience becomes this much more peaceful kind of, it feels almost like a natural pattern of the ocean, of waves in the ocean, waves of traffic, or the breeze, or the sounds of people. And that to me is it's such a great and informative experience, right? Because it shows you that even in the middle of one of the craziest places on the planet, that you can find some sense of relaxation and openness and awareness. And when you find that, it's this magical place. that I want to avoid at all other times.
Well, I guess the goal is get to a place where you don't want to avoid it ever. So it's funny because like very often I know that, and I do this myself, and I hear it very often, people will make these value judgments about what constitutes nature or like a natural event or action or item. And in reality, like you just explained it, and actually I was kind of with you on this journey right there as you're explaining with the lights reflecting. It really, I mean, it's just an extension of us. It's just human beings, and we set in motion the lights, the skyscrapers. We're driving the cars. We're creating the noise. All of that is simply just functions of the universe that we occupy. When we don't have the bandwidth, or we think we don't have the tolerance to be able to work with that for whatever, because we're siloed in our own sort of current day-to-day suffering of the moment type situation. It's like, I don't have time for Times Square. I don't have the energy to deal with Times Square. That's too much. And you could find chaos, so you find negative terms to kind of color. You make value judgments about why it's bad, because really, in essence, it's like, I'm not the open environment. I'm not the vessel, the vehicle that I need to be able to work with the conditions of Times Square in a way that is neutral, in a way that is just seeing it, as energy forms is kind of what it is. And I think just doing this practice there to me is just so much value. So it's awesome that you're doing it. It's awesome that you're leading it. Are there other, and I want to kind of just figure out and discuss kind of what you're up to next. And are more public teachings in the works for you? And are you doing them just in Times Square, or do you do them anywhere else?
So I've been focused mainly on Times Square because I think that it's because of that really rich texture of that place,
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about doing them outdoors as well, maybe going to like parks or the waterfront and stuff. I think that has a similar but different kind of quality to it, and I have been thinking about doing different ones. I just from a virtue of standpoint of time, I've been teaching more in the professional world recently, and I think I have limited ability to do outdoor sits as well. So I've been focusing a little bit more on that. Also because of the pandemic, this year I've been, I canceled the last first couple of sits for the year. Maybe we'll do one, kind of once we get into the fall. I'm hoping so. We can do it 6 feet. You and I can do it. We'll lead it 6 feet apart. We'll just not bring too many people.
That sounds good to me. And just also curious, and I want to we're going to wrap this up in a minute, but do you have an example? I think you had mentioned, do you have an example of a mindful walkthrough, or do you have any kind of instructions or directions about the real estate, the mindful walkthroughs that you were thinking about leading, or any ways that people might have an idea to kind of just acclimate them to what that is? Because I'm sure nobody, or I shouldn't say that, I'm sure somewhere it does exist maybe, but you don't really hear about it very often. So
I've never heard of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, neither have I, but I don't like to talk in extremes. So likely no one's heard of it. But do you have any way that somebody can get acclimated to what that is?
Well, so I think that really what I have done in the past is that as we walk into the showing, or either just prior to entering the space or once we get into the space, I think doing it in the space is better. You come into the space that you're looking at, and taking a little bit of time to actually just relax our bodies, kind of focus on becoming aware of what is in the space, not trying to let go of the agenda. I was like, do I like this place or do I not like this place? Like, is this place priced well or is it not priced well? And rather than judging everything, actually taking a moment to just be present, usually through a relaxation technique, like focusing on your breath for a minute, and letting go of the stories that you want to tell yourself about the space that you're in. And I feel like once you do that, it actually then allows you to open up and experience the space in a more direct way, right? Rather than having the agenda in your head that's constantly like, do I like this? Do I not like this? Is this good? Is this bad? And you can judge all you want after you've relaxed a little bit, right? But that's the way I would do it. So I will lead people on a short guided meditation, focusing on a relaxation, and then just being aware of what you're hearing and seeing and smelling and in the space. Preferably like short, a couple of minutes long, and then going about, doing the tour. And then certainly the other way to do it is if somebody has a practice, then just taking a couple of minutes to just center yourself and ground yourself in the space in your own practice, and then going about the tour of it. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, like I told you, you have a buyer in me in that regard. So I think there's just so much value in taking that approach. And I'd imagine particularly in New York City, and I was thinking about it from your perspective, having mindfulness as a real estate agent in New York City, dealing with the preferences, the frenetic nature of the process itself of, the obviously the people, especially you're dealing with a lot of properties that are high worth. So it's a lot of folks who are extremely busy. Their minds are probably fairly active. There's probably so much movement, so much going on with both your clients and also just the other side. And the ability to kind of have a mindful approach yourself to that situation has to be a benefit. I think almost necessary in my view. But then also to be able to kind of walk your clients through in that sort of a way, to the extent they're interested, to the extent, I'm sure you have to feel that out. I can only see just tons of benefit from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really, truly is a beneficial practice in that space. It can help in any situation, as we both know, but when it comes to real estate, it can be very helpful in terms of keying into what is truly important to you and how a space feels to you, particularly on the residential side. You're talking about a home. You're talking about a place that you want to live and go just put your head down at night and have your sort of sanctuary or your refuge, right? And so how it feels to you is really important. And the only way you can make good decisions about that is being in touch with yourself and in touch with how your heart feels in a space, and how whether your mind is getting in the way of things, and I think also for me, from a selfish perspective, if everybody that I did a showing with, wanted to do mindful showings and wanted to do a little bit of meditation before each showing, it would just mean more meditation and me, myself, becoming more present and more aware on a regular basis throughout the day and throughout the week. And I would love that. So please come, let's do mindful showings. I would love to do it.
Let's hope that becomes more the norm.
Yeah.
CT, so grateful to know you and grateful to sit down with you and have this discussion. I really do appreciate it. And hopefully you can come again and sit down with us again on the podcast, and we can kind of unpack some of your practices and some of the other things we didn't get around to go a little bit further.
That's great. Thank you so much for having me, Cary. I love talking to you about this stuff, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat with you about it.
Of course. And for anybody listening, if you want to take that mindful tour with CT, you can go to his personal website, carytamura.com. We'll have this link in the show notes. And of course, if you want to know more about CT's approach to, I'll call it meditation in real life, really just kind of breaking down meditation in a way that everybody can access it. He does a great job of it on his website, thesittingproject.org. So grateful, man. Thanks again. And hopefully see you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Cary.
Take care.